Fragmentation is often understood as a condition of incompletion, where a fragment is seen as a broken or missing part of a larger whole. However, in Romantic philosophy, the fragment is understood differently, as interpreted by Rodolphe Gasquet through Friedrich Schlegel, who describes the fragment as a fragment like a miniature work of art has to be entirely isolated from the surrounding world and complete in itself like a porcupine. The fragment is not the remainder of a destroyed totality, but an intentional form that possesses autonomy and internal coherence. In this sense, each fragment functions as an independent entity. Schlegel compares the fragment to a miniature work of art that is complete in itself, like a porcupine. This means that the fragment does not depend on an external system or a future completed structure in order to have meaning. It already contains its own integrity. What is important here is that totality does not exist before the fragment. The whole only begins to emerge through the coexistence and interaction of multiple fragments. So fragmentation does not cancel unity, but transforms it. Instead of producing a single enclosed object, fragmentation creates an open system in which meaning arises through relationships between elements. Unity is not imposed through closure, but appears gradually through spatial and conceptual relations. This idea becomes visible in my architectural model. The model is composed of several planes arranged on a shared base. Each plane differs in height, dimension, and orientation, which allows it to function as an autonomous fragment. No single element completes another, and the composition does not try to reconstruct one enclosed volume. At the same time, the model does not deny the presence of a whole. Spatial relationships such as spacing, alignment, and visual overlap generate a relational field through which fragments interact. So meaning does not emerge from one isolated element, but from the network of relations established between them. Through this arrangement, the model reflects the Romantic understanding of fragmentation as a productive condition. In this model, several spatial conditions emerge. The composition shows a central void acting as a primary spatial condition. The fragments do not connect into a closed volume, but remain separated, producing tension between adjacency and distance. The model reveals depth and progression, where alignment begins to structure movement. Dispersed fragments and concentrated areas are organized by a dominant central void. What emerges is not a complete object, but a relational system. So the specific spatial condition emerging from this A2 fragment configuration is a relational field of autonomous elements. Each fragment remains independent, while alignment, proximity, and tension generate a continuous spatial system. The site visit shifts the project from theoretical fragmentation into direct encounter. What becomes important here is not only the physical condition of the site, but also what the site reveals through memory, interruption, and instability. The site is not read as a neutral background, but as a place where architecture, landscape, and lived experience already overlap. The building is represented as a series of dislocated fragments rather than a unified whole that produces rupture and instability, because the elements no longer reconnect into a continuous architectural form. Some fragments appear grounded while the others seem suspended, which creates tension between gravity and displacements. Voids become central because the empty spaces between fragments interrupt continuity and shape the composition through absence. It suggests a state of incompletion and transition. At the level of the site, this reveals a fragmented field of urban and landscape elements where vegetation, open ground, and built edges appear as discontinuous parts rather than one coherent system. This leads to the research question: what does the site reveal, conceal, frame, or abstract? when encountered directly before interpretation stabilizes into certainty. The main spatial issue is a lack of continuity between architecture and landscape, where movement is interrupted and boundaries remain unclear. At the same time, this condition suggests an architectural opportunity to work through fragmentation, using independent elements and voids to structure relationships rather than composing a single continuous volume. So the design intention becomes to mediate between built form and landscape by creating a relational system that reconnects fragmented elements through spatial continuity and interaction. This model identifies key buildings around the site and shows the contrast between the dense urban edge and the open Sanaya garden. The site acts as a threshold between institutional, residential, and public spaces, forming a fragmented context where built and open elements do not create a continuous system. Circulation patterns show that the main roads like Hamra and Spears carry heavy flows, while secondary streets are more local. These flows intersect near the site without forming a continuous system, creating interruptions that reinforce its fragmented condition. Sanaya Garden acts as the dominant open space, while surrounding buildings form fragmented and irregular edges. The site becomes a transitional zone defined by contrast between solid and void. Activity and noise are concentrated along main streets, while inner areas and the garden are quieter and more localized. This creates a gradient from intense urban conditions to calm enclosed space. These environmental factors highlight the need to consider protection from direct sun exposure while also allowing for airflow and ventilation. The sectional movement diagrams show how the site is experienced as a sequence of thresholds, interruptions, and changing spatial densities. Movement is not linear or continuous, but unfolds through partial transitions between open and enclosed. The hypothesis translates the site analysis into an architectural strategy at the spatial level, at the volumetric level, and at the experiential level. I propose a DJ booth within the library garden in Sanaya in which fragmentation is used to organize space through autonomous yet relational planar and volumetric elements. The proposal breaks the continuity of the site into independent A-series planar fragments and, and dispersed volumes that establish relationships through alignment, distance, and spatial tension rather than enclosure. The intervals between fragments become zones of movement, waiting, and interaction, where void acts as the primary spatial condition rather than residual space. Movement through the space creates a sequential and perceptual experience defined by anticipation, partial revelation, and shifting relationships between solid and void. Fragmentation here is not a sign of incompleteness, it is a generator of a dynamic spatial field that produces the new forms of inhabitation, perception, and temporal experience. Inserted in the library garden, the dwelling engages directly with its context. It negotiates between architecture and garden through thresholds rather than through hard separation. Dwelling translates fragmentation into a spatial system defined by hierarchy, displacement, and void. It is organized through stacked and shifted elements where a central void acts as the main connecting space. It does not form a closed volume, but remains open, creating tension between elements. At the same time, it explores the different degrees of enclosure. The use of transparent and solid planes create ambiguity between interior and exterior conditions. The overall organization is not read as a single object, but as a network of relationships where space emerges through alignment, proximity, and spatial tension. The dwelling is organized through essential inhabitation zones. Rest acts as the spatial anchor of the dwelling. Make is positioned as the production and performance zone. Eat becomes the open social extension connected to the shared field, while sleep is treated as the more enclosed and protected condition. I propose a kinetic element through a rotating vertical plane. The plane pivots around an axis, allowing the boundary to shift and the space to open or close. This creates different degrees of enclosure, making the space more flexible and reinforcing the idea of a dynamic, changing condition. The dwelling is inserted within the library garden as a fragmented intervention in relation to the existing library. It remains secondary in scale, creating a contrast between the solid mass of the library and the lighter open system of the dwelling. It lightly touches the ground and responds to the sloped condition, while a spatial gap is maintained to preserve its autonomy. This keeps the project as an independent but relational element within the site. The dwelling is positioned within the open field aligned with existing circulation path and surrounded by open space that preserves continuity between landscape and architecture. This photomontage shows the DJ dwelling booth inserted within the library garden in direct relation to the existing library. The intervention appears as a fragmented and lightweight spatial system rather than a continuous mass. Its dark elevated plane creates a strong visual presence, while the rest of the structure remains open, porous, and connected to the ground. It highlights the integration of the dwelling within the site through its relation to the library, the circulation path, and the surrounding open garden.